Hey guys, come on in, grab a seat, make yourself at home, as you should when you're a guest in Bradley's house. I am your co-host, Jarett Orr. She is the host of my favorite podcast and the executive director of the Nowell Family Foundation, our host, Ms. Kellie Nowell. Kellie, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Jarett. How are you?
You know what? I can't complain because nobody cares. So I just kind of keep it as it is. So, the old saying goes like when somebody asks how you're doing, if you're doing good, you say great. If you're doing shitty, you say I'm fine. But there's really no sense. There's really no sense in complaining and doing either way. So,
That's true.
but it turns out for tonight, I am great because we're coming off of an awesome show. The last episode, we had Brandon Hardesty from Bumpin' Uglies on. He told some hilarious stories. I'm already getting some great feedback on that one. It seems like people really enjoyed it. And then, of course, we had Brindy come on and chat with us a little bit. So a lot of excitement in the last show. And honestly, Kellie, after we got done recording that show, I went, wow, Brandon gave us a great show. Brindy came on and told some really great stories and had some great answers. I'm nervous on how we're going to follow this one up. And then you sent me a text message and said that you lined up a very special guest for all of the listeners in Bradley's house. Kellie, who's our guest today?
I feel super fortunate that I have some really amazing friends. And today we have the pleasure of talking with Sublime's former A&R rep, co-owner of Silverback Artist Management and Controlled Substance Sound Labs, and a dear friend of our family, Jon Phillips. Jon, thank you for being with us.
It's great to be here, Kellie.
So good to have you here, Jon. I know you're a busy man, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Well, I appreciate you having me on.
My pleasure. So first off, right off the bat, I would like you to share with our listeners how you got started in the music business.
Well, I guess you could say in 1991, I was trying to figure out where to go to college and what I wanted to do with my life. And I was just a huge fan of music. I grew up in Northern California, in the Bay Area. I was exposed pretty early on to the music business. My uncle was the first one in my family to really start in the music business and had an illustrious career managing the likes of Rod Stewart and Susanna Hoffs, Prince, Morrissey, amongst others, as a young manager. And as a kid, I kind of got exposed to a little bit of the music biz. And when I was looking for where to go to college, there was the opportunity to come out to UCLA. I was accepted there and start to work for my uncle's company as an intern while being in college. I was really interested in exploring the music business, and I thought I'd be going to law school after UCLA, but I kind of got out to Southern Cal and got entrenched with booking shows on campus at UCLA, at the Cultural Affairs Commission, which at UCLA handled the Jazz and Reggae Festival, handled noontime bookings in Brew and Walk in the Quad area. So kind of jumped right in when I got to college. I came to UCLA in Southern Cal as an excited music fan, extremely influenced by music I grew up with. Mainly at that point, Grateful Dead was a big part of my early exposure to a music and band that kind of existed within its own culture, created its own culture, you'd say, and kind of existed outside the music biz. So between intimate experiences within that realm and kind of watching my uncle grow with the likes of, some of the artists I talked about, I just gravitated to the music business. And when I got out here, I started booking shows on campus. I started working at my uncle's record label, Gasoline Alley Music, and Jon Phillips Management. And I was getting exposed to, firsthand to how the industry actually worked. Real early on, I got exposed to music industry trade magazines. Billboard is one of them, but to the non-consumer, if you were in the biz, there was like trade magazines, Hits Magazine, FMQB, Billboard, of course, they tracked the music business. There's box office tracking, there was radio tracking, there was album sales with Billboard, and it was just interesting once I started seeing like this is a business, and I just kind of gravitated to that, and being exposed to seeing what managers kind of did for artists, and also the excitement of being at a live concert, was just something that inspired me to and music mostly. I mean, like I said, I came in as a fan. I grew up listening to all kinds of music, but my family exposed me to reggae at a very early age. They took our family to Jamaica when, much like Bradley and Jim, I always related to that story where Brad would tell me how, Jim took him to the Caribbean and he became exposed to, that kind of music and rhythm. And that was the same for me. I had hip, cool parents that I think my dad was probably the first white dude with a boombox in New York. And he had, I was born in New York, but I remember back then in 75, 76, the boombox and the cassette tapes of Bob Marley's Naughty Dread album, and just going to Jamaica when I was 6 years old. And honestly think, from what I was told, we were taking a trip to Jamaica to go see Bob Marley play in concert, and ended up getting rained out, so we never got to see Bob. But I did get to go to Jamaica, and just early exposure to the reggae of Bob Marley, the kind of fanfare and spectacle of a Rod Stewart, and then getting exposed and going experimenting, mind expansion and music expansion with the Grateful Dead in the Bay Area as a high school kid. And those were the kind of things that formulated, I guess, my early predisposition to get involved with music, and inspired me to do so.
Well, you have some of the coolest parents. I absolutely adore your parents. They're just the sweetest people. So it doesn't surprise me that you would end up getting into the industry, because I'm sure they gave you a great foundation of music.
I mean, they were in the clothing business, and that wasn't really for me. I like fashion, but I didn't want to be in the same retail clothing business. But my dad was just a music head. I think I was telling you before, I discovered his vinyl record collection at a pretty early age, and took on real early, a liking to the Allman Brothers, Eat a Peach record, and Bad Company and Leonard Skinner. And there were some Dead records in there. There's Crosby, Stills and Nash, of course, the Beatles. And, that was the music that hit me first, classic rock and improvisational, rock music. And also country too. My dad went on the one music business thing that my dad actually did was he did an early tour with Willie Nelson as a tour accountant.
Wow.
Yeah. And when we first moved to California, he actually went on one road trip with Willie Nelson and Paul English and Pootie and the whole kind of Willie Nelson family. And that was something, I think he got that job from my uncle, and just, took it as out of the box. We were moving and he needed work. And I just remember as a kid getting postcards from the Willie Nelson tour. And then we listened to a lot of Willie and Waylon when we moved cross country. So that and the Eagles and things like that. But yeah, my parents were really inspirational. But my uncle was, like I said, he had a real foundation in the music business as a successful manager, and allowed me to come into that world and be exposed to it and pay my dues. And he started a record label with MCA Records called Gasoline Alley Music, and I started working in 91, 92 for Gasoline Alley.
Wow. So when did you first hear Sublime?
Mm-hmm. So by 93, there was a guy kind of like me in the office, a guy by the name of Greg Abramson, Groovy Greg, and he is a guy that was down in Cal State Long Beach, and he was doing a music internship at the label just like me. And we were just the same age, and, kind of just related to each other. And he was actually working in the radio department, and at the, we would just hook up for lunch, and, we would talk music and whatnot. And he was actually in the company at the time. He was doing an internship, but he was also on the company. He was doing cassette tapes for Sublime and packaging them up. And I remember him, giving me one of the cassette tapes. He was basically making early bootleg Sublime cassettes to try to help promote the band, because he was trying to break in. He knew them from Long Beach, and he was like, "You got to check this band out, Sublime." And so he gave me the green cassette, Jah Won't Pay the Bills, and he gave me a cassette of 40 ounces to Freedom. And this was the 40 ounce came out in 92. The music before that was, on Jah Won't Pay the Bills, The Roots of Creation, and Romeo's No Songs. Those were the first two things. I got those, I want to say, in 93. And honestly, they were cassettes, and I remember putting them in my Ford pickup, and I don't think they left the cassette deck for 2 years. They don't leave the cassette deck until ever really after that. But I remember putting Bad Fish on for the first time, or hearing that come on, and just it just struck me as something so simple and beautiful. And it was, for me, kind of the influential music that I was telling you about that really affected me. I mean, Sublime and 40 ounce, they had every bit of that and then some. I mean, they had Bob Marley starting it off with Trenchtown. They had the Grateful Dead Scarlet Begonias. They had the punk rock that was also a big influence, the Descendants and Bad Religion. And I don't know, that mix and the sampling, it was just like, I had never really heard a fusion of music that was that unique, and that also encapsulated all of the groups that were hugely influential for me in one package. So I became kind of obsessed with the music. And Greg Abramson was like, "Well, you should come down in Long Beach and see the band, or come meet the band." And so I started going to early Sublime shows at some of the Orange County, Huntington Beach venues, the hole in the wall spots where Sublime actually was playing for 200 to 300 kids that knew every single word to their music. And there was this energy that was happening there that it's once you were kind of, it was infectious. And once you kind of realized, like, well, there's really something going on. There's a connection going on here. And at the center of that, of course, like, you look up on stage and Bradley was kind of running the show and hitting them on a good night, because there were some great nights and there's some really bad ones. But when they were popping and the pit was rolling and the kids were singing whatever, it was kind of undeniable for me. So I honestly just between that and the 40 ounces, they hadn't recorded Rob in the Hood yet. I think they just kind of started delving down that road. But I just honestly went on a crusade similar to like Greg was, when we just started making cassette tapes and sending them out to people in the music business and trying to get, like, I didn't really care what it was at the time. I mean, I told Gasoline Alley about the band, and things in the music business sometimes take time. And, it was just like, it wasn't necessarily going to be overnight, but I was like, no matter what, I'm working with this band. Like, this is my crusade at this point. And
so how did you make that happen?
Well, it wasn't easy. I'll say that, some people have heard the story before. Some people have. I got friendly with Brad and Miguel and Groot and Greg, and they kind of had a little thing happening really out of their garages. It was just a grassroots, homegrown friends that were printing CDs of Sublime and trying to promote them to independent retail stores and at live shows. And it was the real thing. It was the grassroots post-punk DIY mentality. And these guys were from Long Beach and, not a bunch of Hollywood kids. And it was punk rock. And, there was an attitude there and a kind of rebellious spirit against authority, or maybe the authority of the music biz and the punk rock like thing. And the band was doing all that. And I didn't know who was managing the band or who was doing what. Like, was it Greg? Was it Miguel? Like, it seemed like it was just things were happening, and I wanted to be involved. So I did try to take it to the label and to the company I worked for, my uncle and his partner, and the guys that, I was 23 at the time, and these are veterans of the music business that had already worked with superstars. And I told them, I was like, you got to listen to Sublime, because this could really be the next big, music. At the time, grunge was happening up in Seattle, and Nirvana had broken, through on commercial radio and Soundgarden and all that stuff. And it was like, I knew enough musically that like music happens regionally and subculturally, and what was next, and getting exposed to what was happening in Long Beach and Orange County with the punk, ska, reggae influence, but with hip hop and with the kind of urban culture and beach culture plus cannabis culture. It was all there. And I told the label, I bet the farm and the music, check it out. I think this could be like the next Nirvana. And it took them a while. They didn't necessarily hear it. I mean, if you listen to 40 Ounces to Freedom, just as a layman, it's got a lot of samples and every song runs into each other. And it's kind of almost hard to dissect the songs at first. So the typical record industry guy wasn't necessarily getting it. And the guys that were, I think Sublime was like kind of just, again, wasn't really catering to the industry, although they were rubbing shoulders with some people and making a little noise. They were burning bridges. I mean, I remember when I first got in, it was like there was an attorney that was interested. There was a guy from Atlantic that was interested. Epitaph was kind of, around somewhere. And I just, I don't know. I just stuck with it and kept telling people the music business about it. And I think Brad took a liking to me. And the band came up to Gasoline Alley to meet the label for the first time. They they brought Lou Dog, and they brought their case of beer and their smokes and the whole thing. And they just kind of came up and invaded the label. It was as punk rock as you could really get, and it was in an office of Beverly Hills kind of suits and old school music business people. So they weren't ready for the chaos that was, Sublime and their entourage.
They weren't ready for the chaos. That's a great line.
Yeah, I definitely remember Lou Dog was running around. He pissed on the floor, and there was just mayhem going on, and the execs were like looking at me going like, who did you bring in here? Like, who are these guys? And to tell you the truth, they ended up not having time to meet with the band that day. And the band kind of barged up. Like I said, at that point we were getting friendly. Bradley was comfortable with me, and I was definitely trying to make something happen for them. And they just came up in their own element, and it just didn't work the first time. And remember them leaving somewhat, disenchanted, and they left the office. And I remember going down there that night to the parking lot of the label, and all the label executives had their names on the parking placards. I was just like an entry level, guy at this point, just getting into A&R and I didn't have a name, but I didn't even have a parking spot. But my uncle's the president of the label, and all that they were you could see which cars were theirs. And Sublime went and put this gigantic bumper sticker on my uncle's BMW, which was like some special edition European model, whatever. And they just stuck this. It was one of these homemade Sublime. They were making their own merch and stickers and stuff. It was one of these old KLOS rainbow stickers. And I remember going down there that night and seeing that big as day on my uncle's BMW, and he just flipped. And they were like,
you mean he didn't like that?
We're not signing this band. Fuck this. They'll never, it's the typical, they'll never work another day in this business. So, at that point I was a little bit discouraged and heartbroken, or whatever you want to call it, but I didn't necessarily want to give up. And I called Brad and I was like, yo, the sticker move didn't really go over well, and I don't think these guys want to sign you. And Bradley telling me, "No, dude, you told me to do it." I was like, "No, I didn't tell you to do it. I didn't tell you not to do it, but I didn't even really know, you know." And suffice to say, like at that point, Brad said to me, he was like, I mean, I remember literally, he said, "You know what?" He goes, "Fuck Gasoline Alley." He's like, you can just be our manager, and you know, we'll put your name in the thank yous and say fuck Gasoline Alley. And he was talking about Robin the Hood because they were just kind of like getting through that record. And I was like, well, let's not do that. You know what I mean? But I'm definitely in it for the long haul, and I'm down to go and shop it elsewhere and use my contact base to, you know, see who we can make some interest happen with. If this label's not into it, you know, I'm down. And so that's kind of when I really like, you don't know when you're that age that managing a band and a label and a band and the label and management don't always have the same agendas, or, you know, necessarily there's sometimes a conflict of interest or whatever. But I really didn't care. I was just completely sold on the music of Sublime really being something that, you know, that's what I wanted to put my energy into. And I told the label that, I mean, I'm not going to bring you any more bands. Like, this is the band I want to work with. And while that was going on, Sublime was playing college gigs and backyard parties, still little clubs, and they were trying to kind of enter into Hollywood. They'd play like little dive bars and stuff, and slowly but surely we got some people from the music industry out to see them, and a little buzz was somewhat happening. They were still crushing it down south, but you know, the major record label community wasn't necessarily going to Huntington Beach to the 8.5 Club, you know. But I was, and then the band was coming up here, and I had just finished UCLA too, and there was I'd lived in this place in the Hollywood Hills at the time, and I remember telling the band, like, you know, how about you guys come up, and I've got this balcony that overlooks like this canyon, and you know, it's real, like, come up to Hollywood, and why don't you come and play at my house, like on the balcony, and I'll invite people from the music business and from Gasoline Alley and all that. And Sublime actually came to my house and played 2 sets until the cops came. I think one person from the music business really showed up, but it was one of those like legendary afternoons, and we just really connected. And at that point, I went back to the label. One of the guys that came from the label absolutely loved the band, and you know, one of the older cats that actually showed up, and they had some other shows, so we eventually got people out there. And there was one time that they were opening for 311 at the Whiskey, or supposed to be opening. That was a sold out show. It was finally like a one in Hollywood where it was going to be super packed. And I remember bringing all these label people out there, and this line was outside. And they were all in there. They had their label jackets, Gasoline Alley, and there was other label people there too. And that was one of those shows that Sublime just didn't show up for. So Yikes. It was like another crushing blow, like finally had everybody there. and for where Sublime was at that point, they were opening for 311, to put in perspective, at the Whiskey. Yeah. You know, they weren't headlining, but it just, when you're passionate about something, and again, I mean, we're talking about Bradley Dolan Sublime, probably the best music ever. So, you know, I'm going to stick with that, and eventually was able to get Gasoline Alley to come back around and recognize that, you know, this was something. I think they were just tired of me not shutting up about it too, and was just like, give the kid a shot, you know.
That's how I got Kelly to do this podcast. So
it's true. It's really true.
I understand that. Happened. Jon, maybe you can help clear up a story for me that I remember reading or hearing about. I mean, there's so many different stories, and it's so hard to tell what's real or not. But It sounds like Brad obviously loved the music and he felt strongly about it. Seems like maybe business wasn't something that he was as interested in. Maybe that's why he kept Miguel and yourself around. But I remember hearing a story about a meeting at like a Chinese restaurant where Brad just picked up his shit and walked out and went and ate out in the
Yep.
car while the meeting
Yep.
continued. Were you
Yeah.
were
So
you at
that
that
was,
meeting?
yeah, that was next. So after the label was like, okay, the sticker incident, we'll make a deal with the devil if it's going to make money type of mentality. So, and I'm like, at this point, I was like, listen, I will bet the farm on the music. You guys are going to have to realize this is, punk rock. So it's going to be real rock and roll. And, the one thing that I was very aware about, although not necessarily experienced with, was, the problems with substance abuse in the band, and specifically with Brad. And I do remember telling the label early on, like, the risk here is like a Kurt Cobain scenario. Like, this is such massive talent, but there's also, that's the danger in a sense and the risk. And shortly after, because I'm just one of those kind of guys, like, I'm not gonna mince words or hide from the truth. And let's face it, I mean, substance abuse has been a big part of rock and roll for a long time, and that's why a Bradley's House exists. And that's why there's other people that are trying to do things in this field, because you don't want to lose another rising shooting star. That's but at that time I was sensitive to that and told the label, like, this is a real variable. And these guys had dealt with Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses before, so this wasn't the first time that musicians had been a part of their world that had less than desirable habits and things. And shortly after that, the band ended up, Gasoline Alley came around. They signed, they offered the band a deal. And when the band signed, and then about 4 or 5 months late, no, probably 6 months later, because I think they signed in July of 1994. It's one of the happiest days of my life. That at the time, not many other people really cared about. I was like, I just signed Sublime. And like, there's like one, you know what I mean? It was like me and Greg. No, it wasn't. Nobody necessarily thought it was going to be what it's going to be, except the people that were like myself, Groovy Greg, Sporto, Miguel. Like, we knew, everybody else was just another kind of stab in a sense. Not that they didn't like it, but you know what I mean? To really know like how deep that and penetrating the message and that music and, vibe could hit. And shortly after that, Brad was arrested in some kind of incident at his house that involved heroin and somebody ODing. And I think they were, trying to pin it on Brad, and he got charged with something. And this is where the label had to really step up, because at this point was a similar time to when Date Rape was just breaking. And Date Rape was a single that, although it was 1992 when the band recorded it, it didn't hit commercial radio on K-Rock until 1995. Like January of 95, I want to say, is when K-Rock first put Date Rape on the air. And it was a runaway smash on K-Rock. It was not by design, because Date Rape for me was like a slice of life, cool part of Sublime, but it wasn't the song that I envisioned them getting recognized by and potentially pigeonholed their whole career by a novelty song. So when K-Rock started playing that first, honestly, the first things out of my mouth was like, stop the press and cease and desist. There's all these other songs. And radio doesn't do what they got such a huge reaction on that. It was like, the success of the band started to kind of grow. And at that point, this incident happened, and it was like the label had to pay for a drug, or they hired an attorney to help Brad navigate the legal charges, and then he got a drug diversion charge from the court. I went to court with them. I remember going to court in Long Beach with him, and we appeared, and he got the drug diversion, which meant that he needed to go to a rehab program. And the label at this point really stepped up. They paid, I remember it was like 40 to 50 grand for him to do an outpatient counseling program in the Bay Area. So at that point, it was to keep him out of jail and also to enable him to be able to still travel, so he didn't have this on his record. Because at this point we were talking about international stuff, and there was a single on the radio, and there was a little bit more at stake. And I do have to give credit to Gasoline Alley, because they came and they believed enough at that point where they backed all that. And I started flying to the Bay Area with Brad to his treatments occasionally, and I'm from the Bay Area, so this was close to home for me. And I remember him trying to clean up and going through that struggle and coming back home from that and trying not to be lured back in by even just the geographical nature of being in Long Beach. He kind of moved out to a different area, and at this point, Troy was trying to steer him in the right direction. So we'd go and, meet up, and I was just trying to keep sobriety as something that, was realistic, but it was kind of forced by the situation. And we all had a lot of obviously high hopes, and it wasn't without its struggle. But anyway, that kind of ran its course. And, by 1990, end of 95, Date Rape had been a major smash on K-Rock. The band was selling out the Palace, where, maybe before they were begging to be an opening act, they were now headlining a iconic venue in Hollywood and selling it out. And we had started to solicit for producers to make the next album, which where we used the resources of Gasoline Alley MCA to hire producers and get the band into real studios, because they had homemade the first two records. And it was that was kind of, for me, like, I just wanted to give them all the tools to create a masterpiece that could actually be a huge commercial success, kind of like Nirvana's Nevermind or something at that level. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of up until that point that was what was going on. And I'm not sure if that answered your question, because I got lost in that, but that kind of
the Chinese restaurant.
the Chinese thing. So yeah, so what happened is so when the band came in to meet the label liked to take artists that they were going to sign to a famous restaurant in Hollywood, Chinese restaurant called Genghis Cohen. And I believe Sublime was playing the club Lingerie, which was a rock club in Hollywood. And we said, well, hey, Gasoline Alley, the guys want to take you out to dinner before the show, so let's meet at this Genghis Cohen restaurant. And I remember the band showed up. I had all the execs of the label, like, these are guys, again, that are, in their 50s, 60s, pretty much have had huge success in the music business, have the label now, but they're not in the punk rock world, And remember, Brad came with Bud, Eric, Miguel, maybe, and then they brought like 3 or 4 other dudes with them that I didn't know who they were. And the label had this table, and everybody just came in there and sat down at the table, popping beers and this and that. And I remember, the late chopsticks were breaking. It was just chaos again, and it was like, the label's like, who are these guys? I'm like, well, those 2 guys are in the band. I'm not sure who those guys are. It wasn't their normal, like, record company dinner, with the R&B acts and stuff that they were really signing at the time. And I remember Brad, like, the hot and sour soup came to the table, and it was like one of the big bowls, like, for the table to share. And Brad just reached for the hot and sour soup and put it up to his mouth and sucked down the bowl. And then he bailed. And I remember him, like, I went out to the parking lot. It's like, Brad, what's up? And he was in the back of the pickup playing his acoustic guitar. And the meeting ended, pretty short-lived meeting again. And the band went to play their show at the Lingerie, and the label was the next day I came in the office, they were like, what the fuck? But as I said, eventually it worked out due to perseverance and the music I think did start to affect some other people too. And by 95 by 94 summer they were signed. By 95, K-Rock was spitting Date Rape as a number one song on K-Rock, and they got the Warp Tour in the summer of 95, and that was the first like major tour for the band. And at that point the Warp Tour was like, in some places that was the first year it ever went out, so that was a experiment. And it was like some places maybe was like around the country 500 people, and by the time that tour wrapped back around to Southern Cal at the end of it that summer of 95, Sublime had been on the radio a lot. No Doubt was starting to break, and so there was 5,000 people at Irvine Meadows, not in the main venue, but in the concourse. That's where the stage for Warped was set up. And Sublime was at that point kind of like the band that everyone wanted to see, and the scene was just hitting. So to put things in perspective, that's kind of like where it was at. And those shows were probably the biggest shows Sublime had done to date, probably 4,000, 5,000 people in the concourses of the major amphitheaters, but not yet in the big amphitheaters. And then by 96 and end of 95, after that tour, is when I was able to get the band into the studio with Paul Leary of the Butthole Surfers, who was chosen as a producer, and David Kahn, who had produced Fishbone. And these were separate sessions that would start to ensue towards the end of 95 and 96, or end of 95, I'd say, is when those were going down.
Yeah, that to me, it just speaks volumes of how amazing Sublime's sound and what they were doing is. I mean, you sit back and look at it, you're talking about a business that dealt with guys like Rod Stewart and some of the big names that you mentioned. And, this band came in, they're dog shit and pissed all over the office. Brad ruined a brand new BMW, slurped the hot and sour soup, left and went in the back of his truck to play his guitar, and still had a deal that they were willing to work with. It speaks volumes for how amazing they were, because that just doesn't seem like something that a record label would put up with from a band that really hasn't broken through yet.
Like I said, I think, again, I was relentless about it. I just wouldn't let it die. And there was one guy more at the executive level that I think started to get a little bit interested in the music. But, at that point, labels like MCA and they didn't really realize what they had until they had it. It's more of the core of the guys like Miguel, myself, Sporto, Zach. Like, one of the things we did when first signed the band and brought them into the Gasoline Alley infrastructure, I said, you know what, don't even touch this as Gasoline Alley MCA. Let me work on the next record with the band, but let them continue these two albums they've got, 40 Ounces and and Robin the Hood on Skunk Records. And really what the smartest thing Gasoline Alley did was they allowed us to kind of function independently of them. And so it was like we harnessed the energy of what was Skunk Records, and we just did it out of Gasoline Alley's office for a long time, using the resources there. But it was a calculated effort to just keep pushing the first two albums as Skunk Records, because they had that authenticity, the DIY vibe with Skunk. Skunk was a cool name, you know what I mean? It all fit. And it was like, why let the corporate, machine, that was another part of, kind of observing too for me, or if the machine gets a hold of something too early and it doesn't happen, it's done. You know what I mean? And it was like, this stuff was happening more organically in an authentic nature. So a big part of the, I guess, plan was let's harness what Skunk is doing and just, keep working these albums as that. And that really helped, because the major labels and the guys that wrote, until something's on radio, you know what I mean? They don't really care that much about it.
Yeah, the radio, for those of you who are listening, is where you used to hear music before your Spotify and your YouTube and everything else came out. You might have also heard John mention a boombox. For our younger listeners, that is your iPod, but it's about the size of a microphone or microwave, excuse me. Just a few things to set you up there. Now, John, you had mentioned a lot about like samples and things like that. Now, if you were lucky enough to get your hands on one of those early versions of 40 ounce, you would come across a track called Rawhide and kind of a completely different Get Out. Why don't we hear those on the one that I go and pick up from the store today?
That's a cool question. So one of the things I had said earlier that was really cool and appealing to me about Sublime was like they're like the Beastie Boys, and they took hip hop elements, and a big part of that art was sampling. And sampling laws had changed from, the early hip hop days, and Sublime was making music just straight for the art of it, like they weren't playing by the rules or like we did. So they made their art with a hodgepodge of samples and interpolations and things that, are other people's intellectual property or copyrights that you just can't use and sell. The big appeal of those records to me were the samples, and such a part of the character. When those came to me, I mean, there's no way for anybody to go and listen to those things and be able to dig out and tell you what every sample was. I mean, this was between the DJs that Bradley and Sublime used, the Miguel sound, all the stuff that they put in and baked into these records. There was no there's nothing to like, there's no key that told you, hey, this is that. But we knew they were samples, we knew there were things, but it didn't really happen until those records, really until Date Rape started making noise, and then these records were being sold in stores, and we expanded the distribution through a bigger distributor. Universal wasn't yet putting their names on the records, but they were starting to sell. We just came up against the challenge of like samples actually have to be cleared, and these records were made with no regard to that. So one of the challenges of A&R in a record, or these ones were already done, but like you pay big money for samples in the hip hop world or in another world, and Sublime didn't pay anything. They just made these things. Real big example of one is when they came into my office for the first time to play Robin the Hood, which was in end of 94, before they put it out in 95. Brad's like, I want to play you the next hit. I want to play you my new hit. And he put in the DAT tape, he put in a DAT tape that's what we had in the office, and he played me Cisco Kid. The first thing off of Cisco Kid is a Doors sample. And I'm like, first off, I mean, it's not one of the songs you'd identify as a Sublime hit. And I don't know if he was just joking or he was just into that song at the time. But the other part about it was like, that's got, a massive sample from The Music's Over or Soul. What song is that? Dude. But it's a Doors sample. I mean, how are you going to clear that? And that wasn't cleared. I don't think that was cleared actually until a decade plus later. Even more recently, the Doors sample was taken care of. But yeah, taking all that in, we identified a lot of the samples, and we went to the label, went to the publishers, went to the master owners of the samples, and we hired a person. I remember Nancy Stern was a lady that I hired. She had a company called Sample Clearance Limited, and they specialize in clearing samples. So they went out and got all the quotes for all the things that we could identify that the band told us about, or that we could discern with our own ears, and try to clear some of these things. Couple of notes on that is that one, Rawhide and a few of those things I think got taken out because the fundamental change or copyright of the original lyric or song. Some things never got cleared. Other things like later records like Doing Time has Herbie Mann live at the Village Vanguard, clearable. It had the Beastie Boys, and we do it like this. It's a place to be. Got that cleared. Had to pay 10% of the song, I think, on that. And the Beastie Boys actually asked not to be credited on that one. Betty Wright's Clean Up Woman on Let's Go Get Stoned. Not sure if that was ever cleared or was clearable. But yeah, I mean, there's just so many little things in there. And, we did our best. And sometimes posthumously, I mean, the labels were getting them, and I'm sure there was a few lawsuits. I know there was a few lawsuits for things that were uncleared. I had a lot of guys calling me too, like, everybody thought that Steppin' Razor was a Peter Tosh song, but Steppin' Razor was the Joe Higgs song, and Joe Higgs's publishing was owned by a publisher, Randall Wixon. And one day I got a call at my office, hey, what's the Sublime, like Steppin' Razor? And I'm like, oh, Peter Tosh? No, it's my publishing client, Joe Higgs, another reggae legend, by the way. And we just didn't know, like Brad had a musical depth to him, and Miguel and these guys, they were throwing and putting obscure things, layering these records with all kinds of, samples and interpolations. I remember on Facebook at one point, it was on MySpace before Facebook, there was these groups that actually had published, all the songs Led Zeppelin took from the blues, and all the songs, like all the Sublime songs that Sublime took from, wherever. And those are some of the most in-depth analyses of sampling and interpolating music. But my thoughts on it, I mean, one, you got to give credit where credit is due. But two, I mean, that's an art form in itself. It happens in literature with allusions. Brad was, I mean, they named the record Robin the Hood for a reason. They were stealing stuff and they knew it, But at the same
artistically
time,
borrowing. Stealing's a little rough. Artistically borrowing.
However you want, either way, exactly. I mean, that kind of stuff, when you're just doing it for arts and creation's sake, you're not thinking about the other side of it, and it sometimes comes back to haunt you, or you got to deal with it. And Sublime's music was the ultimate art form of that, So a lot of that stuff, again, like, we learned later what it really was and where it came from. And within that, I made a lot of great friends of musicians and people and reggae legends like Half Pint, where Bradley had taken What I Got from the Half Pint song Lovin' Is What I Got, or Lovin'. And I didn't know what that was. Like, I knew Bob Marley and Peter Tosh, but I mean, who was Half Pint? Like, and I wouldn't know that song, but we later found out because Long Beach Dub went to a reggae festival and Half Pint was playing, and the guys in Half Pint, they knew that LB Dub was from Sublime. They were like, What I Got, like, that's when we found out that was Half Pint song, or not his song, but that where Brad interpolated that hook and chorus, which, again, what an art form to do that and make something new. But we didn't know where that was coming from. And Half Pint ended up getting quite a bit of the publishing on that later, which was a blessing for him. And I'm sure Bradley would have wanted it that way too, but unfortunately, we just never had the time because Brad had passed, and it was like, he never was able to tell us what was what.
Right.
And one that we did know about, and I've told this before, Doing Time, the story behind that is that they took, Herbie Mann's Live at the Village Vanguard, a Beastie Boys sample as well, and some other stuff. And then they took, Summertime and the Living's Easy, which is Gershwin, Porgy and Bess. It's an American standard, theatrical song. That's probably one of the most protected musical copyrights in existence. And what happened with that is the Gershwin estate, heard it from Universal. Universal tried to clear it. And Doing Time was one of those songs that was one of our favorite Sublime songs. I know that myself, other people, and Brad felt like that was one that really, like, was progressive and, showed you a glimpse of where this music could go in a lot of levels. And just a masterpiece of a song. But again, it was an interpolation of Summertime and the Living's Easy from Porgy and Bess. And Universal called me and said, we hate to inform you this, but the Gershwin estate publishing people won't clear this. And the weirdest thing was that I remember going up in the elevator in Gasoline Alley's office all these years I was there, and they had on the marquees of what each office was and the floor numbers and all that, there was always the Ira and Leonore Gershwin estate. I'm like, interesting. Like, so I went on for it was up a couple of floors from my office, and I went up there and I knocked on their door, and it was one of these like offices that you couldn't get into it was just like a reception wall or whatever. It's very sterile, and like I'm like, hey, I'm from the record label downstairs, and I wanted to talk to somebody here at the Gershwin publishing side. We've got a situation with one of our songs that has a Gershwin publishing scenario. So they eventually introduced me to someone in Gershwin's estate like division, that a guy named Mark Goldberg, and they said, go back there and see Mark. And I went back to this guy's office, and there's a guy that I remember seeing multiple times in the elevator over the years, never got friendly or anything. And so we knew each other's face. I'm like, hey, I'm from the label downstairs. What's up? Here's Doing Time by Sublime. And this is a record that's going to come out on MCA and Universal, in Gasoline Alley from downstairs through MCA Universal, and Universal saying you guys won't clear this. So I sat there and explained to this guy from Gershwin's estate that, like hip hop and like the art that is propelling music and pop culture, that this is actually, this is an honor in the sense that it's really taking this incredible American standard and putting it in a progressive light. And, so I don't know if he was going to buy this or not, but anyway, it turned out he was from the same town in Northern California that I grew up in, and we ended up being members of the same synagogue, and he ended up giving me the clearance on the song. And unfortunately that guy, and that song, I remember telling Brad, one of my last conversations with Bradley, because it was before the record came out, and he had Doing Times in the original sequence of the album that he gave me. He re-put like Trenchtown Rock on it on the first song, and the second song was Doing Time. And I told him, I'm like, man, Universal just called and said they don't think they can clear that shit. So, and Brad passed away like 3 weeks, I think, after that. And he, he never knew if that song made it on the album. And I fought like hell to try to make sure that it got on there. And it just happened to be like the guy was right above my office and was from my same town. Like, what are the chances of that?
That's just luck, man. That's amazing luck.
And so what their stipulation was, because they're like, this is fundamental change of copyright and lyric and intent of the song or whatever. So they didn't like that it said Doing Time and the Living's Easy. They were like, you got to change that back to Summertime. And if we're gonna let you release it, and you got to give us 75% of the publishing, but go and change it. Brad had already passed away, so Miguel had to go in the studio and cut that up. And that's actually Miguel's voice that says Summertime. Like, that was spliced in posthumously and became the compromise that allowed that song to actually be commercially released.
A little inside baseball, John. I'm very active in all the Sublime groups, and I talk to most of the fans, and there'll be conversations where, and I'm not going to name any names because they're probably all friends of Kelly's and the family and yours, but occasionally fans will be like, hey, you know what? Fuck that guy. He's making money off of Sublime for no reason, or that guy's still cashing checks on Jon Phillips. Man, he earned his fucking money. I'll tell you right now. He earned his money from Sublime. So it's well recognized, all of the work that you've done to make sure that we could get as many of these tracks as we possibly could. So just to let you know, from the fans' point, we certainly appreciate and understand a lot of what you had to go through.
I was servicing the music and Bradley most of all. I mean, it's something that hit me spiritually. And by telling you guys these stories, I'm definitely not trying to pat myself on the back. I'm just trying to give a glimpse into the history of, some of the behind the scenes things that you do go through these processes. And again, for me, I just at the end of the day, my first thing about it was I just want this music to be exposed to the masses. I knew how important it was and had that connection to Bradley and Sublime, the music. So, it's just one of those things, like, I was serving the music, and I'm glad that on one level everybody got to hear it. It's bittersweet, and I'm sad but inspired every day that, unfortunately in the process we lost probably one of the most talented, musicians you could ever be graced by their presence with. And I just happened to be struck by lightning, and if the thunder don't get you, then the lightning will. And I mean, respect to Brad, Noel, and Sublime, it just, it's been, I would not be here doing what I'm doing today still if it wasn't for that, and I definitely, that's something for me that I never forget.
Jon, let me ask you, and I know that this is a part that Kelly always likes, and it's not one that she asks because she already knows all of you guys. So it can be musically, but preferably not. Obviously, you knew Brad. You guys worked closely together. Give me a memory that you have of a time that you were just kind of hanging out with Brad, or something awesome that happened. People have told all sorts of stuff. Marshall told a story about just going on a boat ride with him the one time. Is there a specific memory that really sticks out about Bradley?
Well, there's definitely, there's plenty of them. I mean, there's one thing that always kind of I flash back to, and that was like one of these days. It was like a sunny day, and I came down to Long Beach to meet up with Brad, and I think he was going to take me by Jim's house or something like that. And I had a pickup truck, and I went and picked up Brad, and we put Lou in the back of the pickup. And then I remember he took me, he's like showing me around Long Beach. I wasn't totally familiar with Long Beach yet. So he was taking me, I was driving, and he's like, showing me, here's this place, and, it's Belmont Shores, but here's where we play. And Lou's in the back of my pickup. And I remember getting into like Belmont Shores, I think. And there happened to be a SBC, like a dog catcher, like police. And they they saw the Lou dog in the back of my pickup. And I remember, and I don't know if it was Long Beach Police or it was actually SPCA. It was one of these, like, I was just like, what the fuck? And so Brad's like, step on it, whatever. And so I remember him directing me through the maze of Belmont Shores, which he knew so well. Like, it was like, I'm really at home with Brad now. And I remember him navigating me to ditch the dog police that was after us and escape and keep Lou Dog at a dog jail. And I think we eventually ended up making it to Jim's place and having lunch with Jim out there on a couple of lawn chairs. And I remember Bradley, he told Jim, because I was a young guy too. I was even a year or two younger than Brad, and he kind of gave me the ultimate compliment. I remember telling Jim, he's like, this is Jon. He's like, he's wise beyond his years, or something like that. And that was just one of those Long Beach Bradley days that, I'll never forget. It was just me, him, and met his dad, and, we ditched the dog police with Lou Dog, and it was just cool. It was innocent, and it was like just seeing Bradley in his neighborhood and element in that kind of sense was really cool.
Kelly, so if Jon is a year younger than Brad, just to catch you up, that means Jon's 27 right now.
Right. Actually, Jon and I are very close in age. Thanks for pointing that out, Jarett. But
yeah, I just turned the big 50 in September. So
see, I'm a few months older than you. I turned 50 in July.
Well, happy birthday. We both got to celebrate our 50s in the COVID zone, which
absolutely.
But
what did I tell you, Kelly? It's double 25.
That's right.
That's how you explain that.
But yeah, what a long, strange trip it's been, and time has just flown. It's like it just seems like it's been a long time, but it almost seems like yesterday that some of these things were happening. And for me, honestly, it was the early days of just getting into this business and having something as sacred as Sublime to be associated with and whatnot, and just to be kind of the beginning of all that. Yeah, I mean, it was still the analog CD. There was no Instagram, Facebook. There was no digital files yet. It was like we were still got to live in the tail end of the golden era of physical records and the record business before the onset of digital technology that completely disrupted and changed the game. And I'm thankful that I got to live in that era. I'm thankful that I got to live in an era where I got to see Jerry Garcia playing the Grateful Dead and Bradley Nowell playing Sublime. Not everybody got that. So and I mean, what a gift. Brad and Sublime gave us this music that will stick with us forever, and brings you back to those times.
Absolutely. Well, we're definitely glad you were a part of it, obviously, because you had a huge impact on Sublime and their history, and also because of everything that you've continued to do. I mean, you've got a tremendous roster of artists right now, several who we had on the House of Bradley Belt compilation album. Obviously, Fortunate Youth did Jailhouse. Ethan Tucker and Sean the Shaman did Steppin' Razor. And, of course, Jacob and Aiden from Law did Rivers of Babylon with my dad. So I think it's really cool to see it all come full circle,
Yep. Roots of
really
Creation, Hyrie, I mean, all the bands that are doing stuff today that are the younger bands and were influenced by that. It's a refreshing look and take on the music, and I remember look at All the Love That We Found, Sublime CD that was also, similar concept, but back in 20 years ago, probably, or more now. And working on that record, or consulting for it anyway, but the likes of G Love, because I had called G Love on that one to do greatest hits, and I love what G Love did on the House of Bradley. That's a really cool April 29th.
Yeah,
I'm glad he
did a good one.
Yeah, and Vonalia's Johnny Butt, really like that. But yeah, it's just cool to hear new takes on the music. I mean, Sublime songs never get old. I think it's a real challenge to cover a Sublime song. It's like, how do you actually, do it justice? And there's a lot of great versions. I mean, when Fishbone did Date Rape on Look at All the Love We Found, that was a perfect, come back to square one, because I feel like that song was so influenced by that. And yeah, just to see this next wave and generation, and we're talking, a generation or two later from when Sublime was doing it in 1996. It's amazing the strength that this music and influence that Bradley and Sublime had. And it's not surprising to me, because there's the same thing that I was kind of in the day believing when I was telling these labels, like, this is timeless, it's a classic. And it's just, when it happens and it's like that, and you're witnessing it, it's always a cool feeling, to see it continue to evolve.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So who are some of the other artists that you're working with now?
So right now, the current roster, Slightly Stupid, who Silverback and Stupid, we've managed them since 1998. And again, I mean, because of Bradley, I mean, one day he didn't have his license and he needed a ride to the office. He called a guy named Miles Dowdy to pick him up and give him a ride to come visit me. And I remember Brad would have a Slightly Stupid sticker sometimes on one of the guitars he played. And I was like, what's Slightly Stupid? And these are these kids in San Diego, I know, little Groms or whatever. I want to help out on the label and try to. And Miles brought Brad to my office one day, and I just remember Brad saying that day, "Hey, this is Miles from Slightly Stupid," and it always resonated with me as symbolic. Like, if you want this music to continue, you know what I mean? Like, this is Miles; he could help take it down the road for you. That just was one of those kind of enlightening things. And so Stupid, obviously, stalwart and the staple, and just continue to defy and evolve and make great music. The other like direct, correlation and gift from Brad, and I've said this before, Jacob Nowell. I mean, I was in my office when Brad brought Jacob, when part of his umbilical cord was still attached to his belly. Him and Troy came up, and I remember Bradley come in. He was so happy. He seemed so healthy, and Jake was just out of the womb type of thing. He brought him to the office, and to think again, what a trip that 24 years later,
yeah. But
it's really cool to and I'm a big believer in where Jacob and Law can go. But Law is a really exciting project. They're just finishing up some mixing and things on a record that they just recorded, and they're starting to put out some cool demos on Patreon. So, I mean, of course, Stupid and Law. Next to that, I mean, Silverback's grown and evolved with, artists like Fortunate Youth is a newer artist named Denim from Huntington Beach that's starting to buzz a bit. Today, our label released a song from the band Catastro that's a little more hip hop. A big part of for me, Ethan Tucker, as you said, was a contributor on the record, and Brett Wilson from Roots of Creation, who's another guy that shares an affinity of Jerry Garcia and Bradley as their main influences.
Yeah.
Cool artists, but I'm also very passionate and deeply involved in the New Orleans funk scene. Reggae music and funk music, I feel, are like cornerstones of just influential music that kind of have a lot of parallels. And I dive really deep into the New Orleans, Silverback has into the New Orleans, funk music with legendary artists like George Porter Jr., who's the original bass player of the Meters, which basically invented funk music and are probably the most sampled rhythm section in all of hip hop. Had that influence.
Wow.
Still play music, in the jam band scene and the New Orleans funk scene and Jazz Fest. Dumpsta Funk is another band that's Ivan and Ian Neville, sons of the Neville brothers and Meters. So trying to cross-pollinate and genre in terms of, and like I alluded to earlier, I mean, music's very regional, and California music and reggae influenced music is one subculture, and New Orleans, it's the birthplace of jazz. It's, to me, the birthplace of funk, and just trying to, again, service the music that I love and try to help, bring those musicians up into a wider audience. So always excited about, the stuff that's happening in that world. And yeah, I mean, that's a definite cross section of some of the artists. We recently, another major thing and I'm really proud of this and excited about it, is we recently started working with Stephen Marley. Which he's just the spirit of Bob, and just I feel like one of the great reggae producers of our time. And I'm looking forward to the new music that he's working on, because it's almost like a hybrid of reggae and soul and blues, and it's so good and so original. And he emulates the spirit of Bob so authentically, and so that's something that I'm really excited about. And I hope I'm not forgetting anybody else, but that's kind of a cross section of a lot of the stuff right now that we're working on at Silverback.
Right.
Yeah,
awesome. You guys are keeping busy.
It's been a really busy time despite live touring stopping. It's just the wheels keep on turning, and people are consuming music, more so than ever. And I mean, music is the lifeblood and kind of the language that we all gravitate to. So
yes,
it's it continues again to evolve and surprise, and it'll be interesting to see what the future brings, given that people have been locked down, and I feel like a creative renaissance, or what's affected artists and what they're going to write about, or what manifests in the creations that are happening during a pandemic or a complete absolutely, unprecedented time. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens out of that,
I
that's
agree.
yeah, so definitely looking forward to that. I mean, another thing, just going through all this, I don't know how many times I've said to myself, man, like, I wonder what Bradley would say about this shit. I actually posted one little meme I made and posted on social media at one point during the pandemic, was Bradley in sunglasses and no shirt from, I think, from the date rape video. And I was like, strapped with protection or strapped with disease. Like, just like, there's so many things that he said that were, even if they weren't meant for, kind of
Right.
relevant, but I just was like, as a friend, and just as a witty, like, I wonder what Brad would say about this shit. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that definitely has been on my mind quite a bit. And I mean, I wish he was here, and I wish that we were able to hear his voice, kind of comment or put something out there artistic. And that's the bittersweet part of it. But luckily, we've got people that are carrying the torch, and people like yourself, Kelly, that are trying to serve a mission to something, again, that I also don't want to overlook, that my experience, and for me, losing an artist and a friend like Bradley Nowell, I mean, that's a gigantic loss and void that's completely unfillable. The collective energy of everybody else, to me, barely makes up at all for that, and for the work that you guys are doing and wherever it's going, I think it's important, because to me, it's such a tragic loss. And it's hopefully that the work that you guys are doing is able to help people, that you steer people away from that course, and if they are on it, help them out before it's too late. I know one thing that Red Light had done was a pretty big thing for, also, was Trey Anastasio of Fish. He did something really big for addiction recovery things with his live streaming stuff. And it's just, it's a reality. This is a tough business, and there's creative people, and people get addicted to their vices. And I think with Sublime, we were all at a time period in our life that we were young and inexperienced and going through these things for the first time. None of us had really ever had somebody in our life that had an addiction problem. And like I said, I mean, give credit, because the industry is often looked at as kind of faceless to that. But, the labels try to step up and pay for the rehab. So you can't always help somebody. And that's a tough thing, and it's always like, you kind of kick yourselves, could I have done more and all that? But, all you can do is learn from your experience and try to shed light, on other people. So,
Exactly.
yeah. And, that's something that it's honorable about what you guys are trying to do. And definitely for me, I work with some incredible sober artists, the New Orleans guys. I mean, they've been in the thickest, deepest funk and that you could ever be in. And two of the artists that I work with, Ivan Neville and George Porter, like, sobriety's been a part of their life for 30 years, and they're some of the coolest, most artistic, deepest people, and they're luckily guys that made it out of the depths of what they, but not everybody does, unfortunately. And so again, I mean, everything that I do, I wear Bradley on my heart, and it's an inspiration, in terms of all that. So,
well, I'm so glad that
you guys in House of Bradley.
Thank you. I'm just so glad that you've continued on and done everything you've done in the music industry and in your life. You're a good person, and I always felt very fortunate that Brad and Sublime had you, shepherding them and guiding them at that point in their career. So thank you for that.
For sure. And I'm, again, fortunate and lucky and privileged to be a part of it,
I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I do this with every single guest that comes on and chats about Sublime with us. You have an 18 or 19-year-old intern walk into your office, and he sees one of your Sublime pictures hanging on the wall, and he goes, "Who's this? I'm not familiar with this band." But he's going to give you an opportunity to play one song to catch him. I'll give you a chance. I'll give this band a chance. Play one song for me, and if I like it, I'll check them out more, and if not, I'm out. What song are you playing?
Uh, Man, the crazy thing is like when date rape happened on K Rock, I and I just say this and to preface it, we ended up making dartboards at the label, homemade dartboards, and sent dartboards to K Rock, and each thing, instead of a number on the dartboard, it had a Sublime song, and the message was that like throw your darts at the board because
Yeah.
wherever it goes, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's a hit. Or,
Sure.
at the time was almost two was like date rape was happening. And again, that's probably one that I wouldn't tell only because I just thought it was a novelty. Going back, I mean, what an amazing song, but honestly, I think that it's really, really hard for me to say that. I mean, Doing Time is the one that I said kind of like to me was a more progressive look at where Sublime might be going in the future. And as far as today, since it has that hip hop kind of feel and it's almost like electronic music, you know what I mean? Lana Del Rey covered it. It's like it has something that um, is progressive. So that would definitely be one of them.
Mm.
I always love the song "The Work That We Do." So if somebody
Mm-hmm.
was an intern for me looking at work in the music business, I would I would definitely have them listen to that song on repeat. Um, that was just always such a cryptic kind of like dark song. Get Out, masterpiece. 40 Ounces to
Yeah.
Freedom, masterpiece. I, I always really liked All You Need a lot. Like, it's just so hard. It's an unfair. I would give them a dartboard again, and I would
Yeah.
tell them, I give them three darts and say, throw them up there and go do your homework.
I like it. Okay, I can accept that as an answer. Yeah, my answer changes all of the time, but as I've said on this podcast before, July 30th, 1996, two things happened. Sublime Self-Titled came out, and it was the day that I became a teenager. I turned 13 on that day, and I remember going to the Wall, and it's just a music store for those of you who are younger. You used to be able to go to the mall and buy music. You didn't have to, it wasn't just a download button. And I remember picking up Self-Titled Sublime, and just, I mean, every single track right from the beginning, I was just like, this is, it just blew me away. But when I got to track 8, when I got to Jailhouse, I don't know what it is about that song or why, but that is the song. So if anybody puts me on the spot, it's Jailhouse has always been my favorite Sublime song.
I mean, that is definitely was one of my favorites too. And I remember seeing the band before it was ever on a record. When Bradley and Sublime would break into Jailhouse, it was one of these ones that was hitting their repertoire a little bit, I think, later. But I remember seeing them do it once at like the Golden Sales Hotel or one of those places. And yeah, that always struck me. I always thought that was like, man, and that song wasn't written by Bradley. It's like Bob Marley gets credited, but I'm not even sure if Marley wrote it. But that's one of the older Jamaican, reggae songs.
Yeah.
I do think Fortunate Youth did a pretty good version of that as well. Jailhouse definitely was a big one for me. Like, I love when they recorded that. Another one that didn't get recorded on the level that I would have liked to have heard is Crazy Fool, which was another obscure reggae cover that also made its way into the Sublime repertoire in a similar fashion to Jailhouse. And when they would play those two songs, those are definitely two that I are very special for me as well. They're neither one of them were written by Brad, but he sang them in a way, and Crazy Fool is like a track that's a Motown style track.
Yeah.
And it's one that I had such high hopes for hearing Bradley record in the studio and do the real recording of it, and it never got to happen. The version on the Palace, other than some mistakes that are part of the character, but the 3-Ring Circus live has Crazy Fool. And if you ever get a chance to watch the DVD of that, or now it's probably not a DVD, but however you access that on Apple Music or video. But if Universal has it, I honestly think Universal botched that release quite a bit. It's one of my favorite Sublime releases. If you listen to the remastered audio from Sublime Three Ring Circus of the Palace and listen to Crazy Fool, there's there's clams, there's mistakes, there's all kinds of shit, but it gives you a glimpse into the the beautiful vocal and melody of that song and Bradley singing it, and definitely really another special one for me too. But yeah,
Perfectly Imperfect. That's kind of how the Sublime. Maybe you can answer this question for me. I had it to ask for Miguel when he was on the podcast, but he spent so much time noodling and singing songs and telling crazy stories that I don't think I got most of the questions in that I wanted. So maybe you know. You hear a lot when you can find these live recordings. Brad liked to do "Romantic Girl." Is that something that he wrote? Is that somebody else's song? I've never been able to find it anywhere else or anyone else doing it, and I don't know why it was never recorded, and it seemed like one that he liked to play.
Romantic Girl. Good question. That would probably be something. And that's definitely what it was called?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. He a lot of times he would do it in a ditty. He would start with "Romantic Girl," and then it would kick right into Bob Marley's or his version of Bob Marley's "Hammer." But it was just like this, quick little. But it was just an amazing.
Yeah, it was in the medley. It was in the medley.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I have to think about that for a sec. I can find out the answer for you though.
Yeah, we can edit this right out of the podcast. I don't give a shit if anyone else knows the answer to this except for me. So,
I will definitely have to think about that for a sec. I'm sure I could come up with the answer though.
Yeah, I've searched the internet high and low to look for, if it was somebody else's track. I can't find anyone else that does it. And in all of the credits for Sublime, it's just credited as "Romantic Girl." And it seems like a song that he only had 2 verses for, but it's just one that always caught me. And I just never understood why we never heard it on any other recordings. And I thought maybe it wasn't his song. I know he liked to cover other people's stuff.
Honestly, that is another one of those old Jamaican songs. I'm pretty sure. I'm like hearing it in my head, and I have to think about it again. It's on kind of on the tip of my tongue, but I'm pretty sure the answer could be found.
Yeah, found answers are exactly what I'm looking for. So again, at any time, if you ever come across any information, you want to shoot that over to Kelly, and she could just fill me in. I'm able to fill in so many gaps in this, or little questions in this podcast, and I know a lot of the fans do as well. I asked Marshall about the Mobb Deep sample on April 29th, and he said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I knew exactly what he was saying with that answer. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Mobb Deep was cleared.
He said, "I don't know what you're talking about, but I will tell you I'm a big Mobb Deep fan." And I said, "I'm picking up what you're putting down. Right. Don't worry about that." So yeah, it was, you know what, John, I could literally do this for hours, but I don't think we should take up too much more of your time, especially because the only other thing I'm going to ask for you is that at some point down the road, when we reach out, you come back on and chat with us and tell some more stories at some point.
For sure.
Thank you. It was so great having you on, John. Thank you very much for taking the time.
I appreciate you guys having me on. It's always good to connect with you, Kelly.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Yep, for sure.
John,
Respect to Bradley, Noel, and Sublime and the LBC. Thank you guys very much. Noel family, Bradley's house, and the podcast. It's good to be here.
Much love, John. Thank you.
Wow, Kelly, once again, you have set up an amazing guest for our listeners. Jon Phillips just told some great stories, some that some people may have heard before. Maybe you haven't. Maybe he gave you a little more information on it, but from somebody who was really there and a part of it, I couldn't have been any more excited. And again, I told you, I don't really get too anxious or too nervous before we record or we do these podcasts. But about an hour before we got on, it kind of set in that we were going to be talking to Jon, and I was more nervous than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. And it was really a cool experience for me. So I'm sure the listeners enjoyed it as well. It had to be cool to hear from Jon and hear some of those stories.
It was. I love Jon, and I have so many fond memories from back in the day with him. So it was really cool to have him on the show. It was really fun talking with him.
And guys, the reason why Jon Phillips came on and spoke with us, not only for his love of Brad and Sublime, but because he understands what the Knowell Family Foundation is trying to do. He talked a little bit about it in the show, and you guys know what we're trying to do as well, and that is raise the funds to get Bradley's house up and running. You guys, we appreciate all the support that the podcast has been getting. Outside of sharing the podcast, listening to it, downloading, clicking that 5-star review, you can also help. And Kelly, I've said it before, and I truly mean this. Every time somebody goes to the knowellfamilyfoundation.org and they make a donation, no matter how small it is, or they pick up a piece of merch, they get a hoodie or a hat, a t-shirt, they go and purchase the House That Bradley Built album, you guys as fans really get to say that you have your part and your piece in the next chapter of what Sublime is. And that's helping get Bradley's house up and built and help musicians who are struggling. So we appreciate that. Make sure you guys visit the knowellfamilyfoundation.org. Pick up some merchandise, make a donation. That's why we're doing this podcast. We're bringing it to you guys for free. You don't have to worry about paying to download us anywhere. All we ask that is if you get an opportunity, you donate $1, you donate $2, or you let a friend know about this podcast and help get the word out there. Kelly, there's also outside of the knowellfamilyfoundation.org and all of the amazing social media sites ran by the awesome Jen Armstrong. Jen, thank you so much.
Love Jen.
We also have a Venmo and a Cash App set up, and I always get them confused. So tell anybody who wants to send $1 or $2 digitally by clicking a button on their phone how they can do that.
We have lots of ways for people to donate, and absolutely, Jarett, we appreciate every single dollar, and everything goes towards getting Bradley's house built, and we're super stoked to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. We can all take our part as fans in helping Brad's family and friends get this foundation up and running. There's so many people that are putting so much hard work into this, and we need to pull together and get this house built. And the cool thing about the Venmo and the Cash App is you can send $1, you can send $2. People ask all the time, how can I help? Well, that's the way that you can do it. I do it all the time. I'll get a text message from Kelly saying, did you just send $2 through the Cash App? Yeah, I did, because I had $2 sitting there and I want to put it in the till and get us that much closer to getting the house built. So you guys can help it and do that as well. Tell a friend and just do what we can do to be the next part of this story. Kelly, what we always do is we like to end off with a song, and I think Jon Phillips had spoken a little bit about one of his artists and a song that he also was a big fan of from Sublime. What are we going to let everyone off with today?
We're going to hear Steppin' Razor by Ethan Tucker featuring Sean the Shaman. It's a great interpretation of the song, and if you haven't heard it yet, I think you're going to love it.
Guys, until next time, we thank you so much for spending your time with us, and you don't necessarily have to go home right now, but unfortunately, you do have to leave Bradley's house. I'm Jarett Orr for Kelly Knowell, and we'll see you guys next week.
I'm dangerous. Don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. Steppin' razor, I'm dangerous. If you wanna live, treat me good. If you wanna live, I beg you treat me good. I'm like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Like a stepping razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. Don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. If you wanna live, treat me good. If you wanna live, I beg you treat me good. If you are a bully, treat me good. If you are a bully, I beg you treat me good. I'm like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Like a stepping razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Like a stepping razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous,
so dangerous. In the temple of my mind, I'm the light to the stone. We all live together, one spirit, one soul. Leaf of one tree, tree of one seed. Stepping like a razor, cutting through the crease. Oh, I told them bully long time ago, better treat me real good, much better than before. From the 253 to the LBC, magical methods are manifested to the beat.
I'm like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Stepping razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous, so dangerous. Like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. If you wanna live, treat me good. If you wanna live, I beg you treat me good. If you are a bully, treat me good. If you are a duppy, I beg you treat me good. Like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. Stepping razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. Like a walking razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous. Stepping razor, don't watch my size, I'm dangerous.